Discipline is the alchemy of willpower. It turns scattered hours into legacy. They never taught you what discipline really is. Not in school, not at home, not in the culture you were raised in, because the world has sold you an imitation. They called it restriction, punishment, boredom, routine. They told you it was the opposite of freedom, when in truth, it's the only path to it. Most people think they're chasing wealth, power, purpose, but what they're actually craving is something far more ancient, inner alignment, and the only way to unlock that is through discipline, not the kind that beats you into submission, but the kind that summons you to remember who you are every single day. Discipline is not about control. It's about remembrance of who you promise yourself you will become. It's the most misunderstood shortcut in existence because it doesn't feel like a shortcut. It feels like the long road, the quiet road, the one without applause or shortcuts. But Napoleon Hill understood this long before Instagram reels and motivational sound bites. He saw that every successful man or woman had made an internal vow, a silent contract with themselves, and they honored it when it was raining, when it was dark, when no one was watching. They showed up, not out of hype, but out of honor. Because here's the truth, your future doesn't arrive. It's revealed through every act of disciplined becoming. Discipline is the daily vote for the life you say you want. And if you won't cast it, chaos will. So let's stop pretending success is about luck, or timing, or talent. It's not. It's about consistency without witnesses. It's about waking up tired and doing it anyway. It's about being unseen and still being excellent. It's about the invisible hours, the ones no one will clap for, that shape everything they will clap for later. So today, we remember that discipline isn't punishment. It's proof that you still believe in who you're becoming. Excellent. We expose the seductive lie of motivation culture, emotional addiction, and why most people never build a disciplined life. Not because they're weak, but because they've been trained to chase the wrong feelings. Now entering, they told you to wait for motivation, to feel inspired, to get into the right state. They said, you'll do it when you feel ready. Don't force it. Go with the flow. But what they didn't tell you is that the flow you follow becomes the life you tolerate. Most people are addicted to emotion, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, corrosive way. They make their moves based on how they feel. If they feel tired, they don't work. If they feel overwhelmed, they stop. If they don't feel motivated, they wait. And they wait. And they wait. Until one day they're staring in the mirror at a version of themselves they never agreed to become. Not lazy, not broken, just emotionally loyal to comfort. This is the silent trap of modern ambition. You are trained to react, not to decide. To chase momentum instead of forging identity. But let me tell you a secret. The version of you who wins does not need to feel ready. They don't need motivation. They don't need hype. They need only one thing, a vow. Not a loud vow, a quiet one, made in private, signed not in ink, but in discipline. You see, emotion is a wave, discipline is the anchor, and most people never anchor themselves. So they drift from podcast to podcast, from dopamine spike to dopamine spike, from temporary discipline to permanent disappointment. Motivation is a sugar high. Discipline is blood and bone. It rewires your nervous system. It tells your subconscious, I am the kind of person who follows through. And your mind begins to believe you. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Your subconscious doesn't care what you want. It only believes what you repeatedly do. It doesn't care if you read Think and Grow Rich. It cares if you show up at 5 a.m. when your bed feels like paradise. It cares if you keep the promise you made when you were inspired, even when inspiration is gone. Most people don't fail because they're unmotivated. They fail because they haven't built the spiritual stamina to act without it. This is the first initiation into greatness. Can you act in the absence of emotion? Can you build when you don't feel like a builder? Can you create when you don't feel like a creator? Because that's what separates the hobbyist from the master, the spectator from the architect, the one-day dreamer from the day-one rebuilder. Look around. Most of the world is waiting to feel different before they act different. But the truth is, your feelings follow your rituals, not the other way around. Read that again. If you wait to feel confident before you act with power, you'll never move. But if you act with power, your confidence will be forced to catch up. That's the paradox of discipline. You don't wait until you feel like a disciplined person. You act like one and become one. This is what Napoleon Hill meant when he spoke of definiteness of purpose. It's not just about clarity of goal. It's about clarity of identity. A man with purpose doesn't wait. He moves with or without applause, energy, or validation. Because here's what discipline really is. It's devotion to a future version of you that only you can see. And every time you keep a small promise to yourself, you water that vision. You prove to your own nervous system that you are no longer available for self-abandonment. And slowly, your identity shifts. Not because of hype, but because of evidence. And once identity changes, everything else follows. Habits become automatic. Consistency becomes natural. Execution becomes inevitable. But none of this happens if you are still a slave to how you feel. Discipline is liberation from emotional slavery. It's the great divorce from the part of you that thinks short-term comfort is more important than long-term legacy. This is why most people can't change, because change hurts. Change is inconvenient. Change makes you feel like a fraud before it makes you feel like your future self. But that's the code. You must endure the misalignment phase, that sacred window of time when your behavior is ahead of your identity, when you don't feel like a disciplined person, but you're acting like one anyway. And one day, the mirror catches up, the results show up. The world asks how you did it, and you won't say much because it wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was built in silence, in moments of resistance, in hours of invisibility, in 1,000 unseen decisions that no one applauded, but your future did. Discipline isn't the enemy of emotion. It's the guardian of it. Because when you build a disciplined life, you don't kill your feelings. You lead them. You stop being led by your emotions, and you start leading them toward what matters. So here's the question only you can answer. Are you chasing a feeling or building a future? Because both roads demand your time, but only one will give you yourself in return. There's a courtroom inside you. You don't see it, but you feel its presence. A silent chamber where your soul sits and watches, where every action is measured, where every broken promise is remembered, and where every kept one rewrites your destiny. This is the hidden architecture behind discipline. It's not about forcing behavior. It's about forming belief. Because whether you realize it or not, you are always building self-trust or breaking it. Every time you snooze the alarm, every time you scroll instead of study, every time you postpone your greatness until tomorrow, your inner judge takes note. Not to punish you, but to record the truth of what you really value. See, there are two versions of you, the one who talks and the one who watches. And the one who watches is far more powerful because that is the version of you who decides whether or not you're trustworthy, not to others, to yourself. This is the root of all transformation. You cannot build a disciplined life if your subconscious doesn't trust you. That's the invisible contract, not written on paper, but etched into habit. And every action is a signature. Every choice is a clause. Either you are reinforcing that you are who you say you are, or you are proving, again, that you are a liar. That's a hard truth, but it's a freeing one. Because once you know the rules of the inner courtroom, you can stop waiting for permission and start honoring your name. Napoleon Hill spoke of autosuggestion, the idea that repeated affirmations and intentions program the subconscious mind. But what if I told you that your most powerful affirmations aren't your words? They're your actions, your rituals, your routines, waking up early, training your body, sitting in silence, writing the vision, keeping your word. These are affirmations more powerful than anything you say aloud because your subconscious doesn't speak English. It speaks pattern. It watches. It calculates. It remembers. And when your actions contradict your ambitions, it doesn't get inspired. It gets confused. This is why people sabotage, why they start and stop, why they feel unworthy even when they work hard. Because deep down, the inner judge saw the lies, the gaps, the rituals abandoned when no one was watching. And so, it withdrew belief, but the opposite is also true. Discipline is how you earn back your own belief, quietly, relentlessly, day by day. It's how you rebuild inner safety, the sense that your future is safe in your own hands. Because until your subconscious feels safe, you will never rise beyond what it believes you deserve. So how do you change that? You stop talking, and you start proving. You become the kind of person who makes a plan and follows it, not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. And slowly, the judge within you leans forward, watches more closely, whispers, maybe this time. It's real. Discipline is spiritual because it brings your soul back into alignment with your word. And nothing is more divine than a human being who can trust their own voice, not out of ego, but out of evidence. That's the new contract. And you can start writing it today, not in some dramatic way, but through small, quiet acts of self-respect. Getting up when you said you would, finishing what you started, saying no to the shortcut, saying yes to the silence, holding the line, even when it shakes. These are the rituals of kings, of queens, of those who rule not others, but themselves. And once you reestablish that trust, a strange thing begins to happen. You stop negotiating with mediocrity. You stop justifying your excuses. You stop needing to be convinced because you've already decided. Discipline becomes natural, not because it got easier, but because you stop betraying yourself. And when self-betrayal ends, everything begins. Because here's the truth. You can have 1,000 strategies, 100 mentors, all the books, all the tools. But if you don't trust yourself to follow through, none of it matters. Success doesn't belong to the smartest or the most motivated. It belongs to those who make a vow and keep it. Even when it hurts, even when it's boring, even when it's lonely, especially when it's lonely, because those are the moments the judge within you watches most closely, not when it's easy, but when it's inconvenient. That's when it writes the new story. That's when it says, this one is this one can be trusted. This one is ready. You've been waiting for the world to see you differently, but that begins when you do. So here's the real question. Are you living in alignment with the version of you claim to be? Or are you still breaking the contract, expecting a reward for promises you haven't kept? If so, it's not judgment, it's a wake-up call. Because the future doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the clearest conscience. So take the pen back, rewrite the contract. Start small, start now, and keep the vow. The world is obsessed with novelty, new hacks, new methods, new goals, new versions of success. But greatness has always belonged to the ones who understood something deeper. The sacred doesn't live in the new. It lives in the known, the repeated, the boring, the grind, the same motion, again, the same breath, again, the same practice, again, until what once felt mechanical becomes magnetic. This is the unseen beauty of discipline, the part no one claps for, but destiny respects. Because repetition is not failure. It's not stagnation. It's not wasting time. It is refinement, and it's how your future is formed. We live in a dopamine-drunk culture that confuses excitement for growth, that abandons the process because it feels slow, that worships speed instead of mastery. But the real ones, the architects, the warriors, the builders of legacies, they know speed is nothing without rhythm. It is rhythm, not speed, that bends reality. Every sculptor has a rhythm. Every writer, every monk, every master. You'll see it in their silence, in the way they return to the same seat, the same tools, the same rituals, not because they're stuck, but because they're becoming. Becoming requires repetition, and repetition requires reverence. This is where most people fall. They think discipline is about grinding until you hate your life. They think it's about perfection, about being robotic, about suffering your way to success. But discipline, true discipline, is none of those things. It's not about force. It's about fusion. The fusion of identity and action. The closing of the gap between who you say you are and what you repeatedly do. And that only happens in the grind, not the dramatic grind. The sacred grind. The kind that is invisible to everyone else, but unmistakable to your future self. The gym when it's cold. The journal when you're numb. The study when your eyes burn. The plan you revisit for the 50th time, knowing it's not about the plan. It's about who you become by holding it. This is your altar. This is where you return. Not because you have to, but because you're called to. Napoleon Hill knew this. In Think and Grow Rich, he spoke often of persistence, the continuation of effort long after the initial excitement has died. But what he was really speaking of was devotion, not religious devotion, spiritual devotion to your vision, to your purpose, to your own soul. And devotion isn't loud. It doesn't post daily updates. It doesn't need a hype track. It just shows up again and again and again. Until one day the repetition turns into rhythm, the rhythm turns into identity, and the identity turns into results that seem unexplainable. But you'll know. You'll remember every morning you didn't want to move, every hour you almost quit, every moment you felt like nothing was working, but you move anyway. Because here's the truth. Repetition is proof of belief. You don't repeat what you don't believe in. You don't repeat what you don't respect. So if you keep quitting, it's not a discipline problem. It's a belief problem. Somewhere deep down, you don't yet believe this is who you're meant to be. But the grind, the sacred grind, is the forge where belief is built, where old stories are burned, where new truths are engraved into your nervous system. And yes, it's slow. It's inconvenient. It's hard to measure in the moment. But discipline is a form of time travel. Every act of repetition today is a letter to your future self, a message that says, I haven't forgotten who we came here to be, and your future hears you. That's why people with rhythm move different. They carry a frequency you can feel. They don't just show up, they arrive. There's no noise, no explanation, just presence. Because repetition creates presence. It slows the mind, strengthens the will, and gives the soul a structure to expand inside. This is why monks repeat mantras, why athletes repeat drills, why creators return to the same tools. Because mastery lives in the margins, not in grand moves, but in small, repeated ones that compound until they crack open the door to everything. And yet, most people will avoid repetition. Why? Because it forces you to face your own resistance, your boredom, your doubt, your discomfort with silence. But here's the irony. The silence you avoid is where your power lives. In that silence, you will hear the voice you've been missing. The one that doesn't scream. The one that doesn't hype. The one that simply says, keep going. So keep going. Don't change the routine just because it doesn't feel dramatic. Don't abandon the process just because it isn't glamorous yet. This is the sacred grind. This is where gods are built in secret. Where kings return to their breath. Where queens sharpen their vision in the dark. You are not behind. You are just one repetition away from remembering who you are. Every act of discipline is a conversation with your future. Not the distant, abstract future, but the embodied one. The version of you that already exists in potential, waiting to be unlocked, not found. And the key to that version is not hidden in some distant breakthrough. It's right here, in the next decision, the next hour, the next breath. This is the sacred irony. The future is not ahead of you. It's beneath your current choices. Every disciplined act you take is not just action. It's architecture. You are building a bridge, brick by brick, hour by hour. A bridge between the now, chaotic, loud, emotional, and the then, stable, clear, aligned. But bridges are not built by accident. They require precision, deliberate motion, the willingness to feel discomfort now, for alignment later. This is what most people will never understand. Discipline doesn't just change your habits. It changes your timeline. Every time you say no to distraction, every time you choose alignment over impulse, you bend time in your favor. You move closer to the version of yourself that others will one day call discipline when all you were doing was choosing truth over comfort. The most dangerous phrase in the world is, I'll do it later. Because later is where dreams go to die. There is no later. Only now, repeat it, now, again, now. With more presence, now. Even when you're tired, now. Because it matters. This is what legacy is built on. Not one massive moment, but thousands of small, disciplined choices that no one will witness, but your destiny will. Discipline is divine because it teaches you to trust the invisible, to show up before the evidence, to plant before the harvest, to persist before the reward. This is what separates the casual from the chosen, the many from the few. Because the few understand that discipline is a form of spiritual investment, not into outcomes, but into identity. They know that the path to becoming someone you've never been requires doing things your old self will never understand. Waking up early when sleep would feel better. Saying no to temptations that no one else would judge. Studying when the world says you've done enough. Refining your craft when no one's watching. These are the hidden steps on the bridge, and most will never take them. Not because they can't, but because they won't. Because they're still waiting to feel ready. Still waiting for the perfect plan. Still waiting for the moment that never comes. But if you're listening to this, you already know. The moment is now. It always was. You don't need a sign. You are the sign. You are the living permission slip to begin. Discipline is how you walk the bridge, before the applause, before the title, before the external validation. Because you're not building for attention. You're building for alignment. You're not living for reaction. You're living for resonance. And that resonance is quiet. It's the moment your soul nods in agreement with your choices. The moment your future self whispers, yes, that's it. Keep going. Because the real reward of discipline isn't the outcome. It's the becoming. The way your posture changes, the way your voice deepens, the way your presence grows heavier, steadier, calmer. That's what people start to feel. Even if they can't name it, they feel that you're different. Because you are. You've stopped negotiating with your potential. You've stopped treating your purpose like a side project. You've stopped giving energy to what distracts and dilutes you. And now, you're crossing the bridge, one step at a time. And when you look back, months from now, you'll realize the gap wasn't as wide as it felt. You just needed to start, to walk when it was foggy, to move when it was messy, to trust that discipline would become your eyes when you couldn't yet see the end. So if you're tired, good. That means you're building. If you feel doubt, good. That means you're stretching. If it feels lonely, good. That means you're ahead of your time. Just don't stop, because the version of you dream about is already walking to meet you. Build the bridge. Don't break it. This is where we fuse everything. Discipline is not just action, but identity. Ready to move forward? Napoleon Hill called it definiteness of purpose, but what he was really pointing to was embodiment. Let's speak to that deeper identity now. There comes a point in every journey when the actions are no longer external. They become internal law. They are no longer habits. They are no longer strategy. They are who you are. This is the final transformation of discipline, not as obligation, not as a tactic, but as identity. It's no longer about trying to be consistent. It's about no longer recognizing yourself without consistency. It's not about forcing routines. It's about being unable to live out a rhythm with your soul. You don't meditate to check a box. You sit because silence is your sanctuary. You don't train to look a certain way. You train because movement is how you pray. You don't journal because it's trendy. You write because it's how you speak to the future. This is discipline as a lifestyle, as a frequency, as a spiritual posture. And when you live here, the world doesn't recognize you at first because you don't chase validation. You don't explain your boundaries. You don't perform discipline. You embody it. And embodiment is quiet, not passive, but still, not soft, but immovable. You become the mountain. You become the storm's edge. You become the unseen presence that commands without needing to speak. This is what happens when discipline fuses with identity. Your environment no longer dictates your behavior. You dictate the environment. Your emotions don't decide your actions. Your actions shape your emotions. You are no longer pulled by the winds of mood. You move by command, not out of arrogance, but because you finally trust your own authority. That's what identity gives you, spiritual sovereignty. You're no longer asking, what should I do? You're asking, what does my future deserve from me right now? And then you do that without overthinking, without delay, without applause. Napoleon Hill called it definiteness of purpose, but behind that phrase is something deeper, a self who cannot be shaken, a man who lives by code, a woman who protects her rhythm like royalty, a soul who has chosen mastery over momentum, devotion over distraction, alignment over attention. This is rare because most people are still outsourcing identity to the outside world, to trends, to temporary standards, to trauma. But a disciplined soul reclaims authorship. They stop living as a reaction. They start living as a response to destiny. And when you live this way long enough, something shifts. People feel it. They start treating you differently. They can't explain why, but they sense something in your presence. You don't move like them anymore. You don't chase, beg, panic, or perform. You move with rhythm, with stillness, with a presence that speaks before your words do. Because your discipline has become your aura. And now you trust yourself. This is the invisible reward no one talks about, the kind no bank account can hold. Not more money, not more praise, but internal congruence, where your values and your behavior are no longer at war, where your conscience and your calendar finally agree. You wake up and don't have to guess who you are. You already know You're not trying to be consistent. You are consistency. You're not trying to be productive. You are production. You're not trying to find balance. You are equilibrium. This is the true wealth. This is the untouchable freedom. This is what they meant by legacy. Not what you leave after you're gone, but what you live with while you're here. Because you can have the accolades. You can have the followers. You can even have the external results. But if you don't respect yourself in silence, you're bankrupt. That's why the disciplined ones are rich, long before the world ever sees it, because they've made peace with repetition, because they've mastered the mirror, because they've fused their name with their word. And in a world that trades identity for comfort, they choose to remain unbought, unmoved, unavailable for compromise. This is your next level. It's not a destination. It's a decision. A decision to let go of the old self, the one who needed motivation, the one who needed to feel like it, the one who kept negotiating with their greatness. That version of you is gone, buried in the hours no one saw, in the rituals that became sacred, in the silence that became your temple. So now you move different. You speak with less. You waste nothing because your time is expensive, because your presence is built, because your identity is no longer in construction. It's in command. And from here, everything changes. There's a silence that follows transformation, not the silence of absence, but the silence of arrival. When the war within you no longer rages, when the noise fades and the only sound that remains is the steady rhythm of your own becoming. You've come far, not because of how much you've done, but because of who you've chosen to no longer be. You no longer chase energy, you create it. You no longer wait for alignment, you walk in it. And you no longer abandon yourself because you finally understand discipline is not what you do to control your life. It's what you do to honor it. This is the return, not a return to the old, but a return to the truth. The truth that you were never weak. You were never broken. You were simply out of rhythm with who you were always meant to be. And now your rhythm has returned. You wake with intention. You move with clarity. You rest with peace. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped betraying yourself. That's the gift of discipline. It gives you back your name, your edge, your center. It doesn't make you invincible, but it makes you undeniable. You stop hiding from the mirror. You stop fearing the silence. You stop needing the world to confirm what you already know. You are trustworthy, not because of what you say, but because of what you repeat. And what you repeat becomes who you are. So now, every step you take is heavier, not with burden, but with meaning. You hold your time differently. You carry your breath differently. You meet each day like a quiet king, a composed queen, not for display, but because you remember your own royalty. Discipline did that, not as punishment, not as control, but as remembrance. It brought you back to yourself, to the part of you that doesn't flinch, doesn't fold, doesn't run, the part of you that builds quietly, that honors your word in the dark, that doesn't need praise to keep going, because the reward isn't in the result. The reward is self-respect, that sacred feeling of knowing you no longer have to convince yourself of your worth. You live it, in your walk, in your breath, in the way you show up when no one's clapping. That's the real arrival, not when they see you, but when you see you, and now you do, because you kept showing up. Because you took the long road when shortcuts whispered. Because you held the line, not for perfection, but for integrity. You become what most only pretend to be. Discipline. Not in image, but in essence. So now, as you move forward, don't forget this feeling. This is not a peak. This is a return. A coming home. To rhythm. To truth. To the version of you who never needed fixing. Only remembering. You are the quiet one. But your presence is loud. Because you've earned it. So carry this stillness, carry this clarity, not to prove, but to protect, because the world will try to shake it, to pull you back in the noise, to sell you distraction disguised as opportunity. But you will remember, because you've lived both lives, and you know which one leads you back to yourself. So walk steady, build quietly, rise consistently, not because they're watching, but because you are. You don't need the world to believe in you. You already do. You've carried the code all along. Now you have the key, use it.